There's something deeply weird about how well Silent Hill 1 still works. On paper, this game should be harmless by now. It's a PlayStation 1 relic with tank controls, jagged character models, and fog so dense it might as well be the console screaming, "I can't render that far, sorry." This is the kind of thing we're supposed to revisit as a curiosity, a piece of horror history you respect, not something that still manages to get under your skin. And yet, you start a new playthrough just to see how it holds up, and within minutes, the atmosphere has you in a stranglehold. The streets feel wrong, the quiet feels heavy, you walk slower, swing the camera more often, and suddenly you're not analyzing it like an old game anymore, you're just back in that feeling. That's the whole point of this video. Silent Hill 1 proves that true fear doesn't age, not because old games are automatically better, and not because nostalgia is still doing all the lifting, but because its horror is built on things that don't depend on resolution or frame rate. It is built on what you don't see, what you don't understand, and the way the game keeps forcing you to step into situations you really don't want to be in. So I want to break that down into 3 parts. How the game uses absence, fog, darkness, silence as its main weapon. How its crude, almost awkward visuals accidentally create better monsters. How the way you actually play the game turns the fear into something you're responsible for. And to borrow a zero punctuation quote I once heard and now firmly to believe to be true, it is as such. You see, there are 3 kinds of horror games. First, there's the kind where you're in the dark room and the guy in a spooky mask jumps out of a cupboard going a bloogie woogie woo. That would be your Doom 3. Then there's the kind where the guy in the spooky mask isn't in the cupboard, but standing right behind you and you just know he's going to go a bloogie woogie woo at some point, but he doesn't and you're getting more and more tense but you don't want to turn around because he might stick his cock in your eye. That would be your Silent Hill 2. And then there are horror games where the guy in the spooky mask goes a bloogie woogie woo, or standing on the far side of a brightly lit room before walking slowly over to you, plucking a violin and slapping you in the face with a T-bone steak. That would be your later Dead Space games. You see, the second one is best, because your imagination is doing all the work. All a good horror game needs to do, hand you a piece of sandpaper and shout encouragement as you vigorously massage your own undercarriage. Silent Hill 1 might not be the second one in that quote, but it plays in exactly the same space. Horror that hands your brain the sandpaper and lets you do most of the damage. Let's start with the most iconic element of Silent Hill, the star of the show that technically isn't even a thing, the fog. If you really think about it, most of Silent Hill is just you walking through nothing. Empty streets, abandoned cars, buildings that look like they gave up a long time ago. The town doesn't jump out at you screaming, "Horror!" It just quietly refuses to feel like a place people actually live in. It's like the world ended 5 minutes before you got there and nobody bothered to tell you. And then there's the fog. On a technological level, it's a performance hack. But as horror, it's genius. The fog is basically the game reaching into one of humanity's oldest fears, the fear of what exists just outside your field of vision. You can hear the radio static spike, you can hear wings flapping, or feet scraping across concrete. Your brain is convinced something has to be there. The fog just refuses to confirm it. What makes this so effective is that the game never rushes to reward you with a monster. Sometimes the static builds, and nothing attacks. You walk, you hear things you never see. The town feels populated by possibilities more than actual enemies. That uncertainty is the real enemy. You hear things you never see. The town feels populated by possibilities more than actual enemies. That uncertainty is the real enemy. You're not scared of what the game shows you, you're scared of the feeling that it could show you something at any second and chooses not to. Then the game flips the script indoors. The fog gives way to darkness. Harry's flashlight is this pathetic little cone that carves out a tiny slice of safety in front of him, and everything beyond that light might as well not even exist. You'll hear something breathe in the corner of a room and have to manually swing that light towards it, volunteering to see the thing that's trying very hard to stay in your peripheral vision. The camera angles do their part as well. This isn't a modern free camera that exists to make your life easier, it is tilted, obstructed, weirdly placed, like the town itself is choosing how you're allowed to see it. Sometimes you walk into a room and the camera frames you from the ceiling. or behind bars, and suddenly you don't feel like the protagonist anymore. You feel like you're being observed, and when the other world arrives, it's like the town stops pretending. Floors turn to rusted grates over bottomless dark. Walls begin to peel. Normal architectures mutate into metals, chains and stains. It's still the same layout, the same school, the same hospital, but it looks like the skin of the place has been literally peeled back. You're walking through exposed nerves. The wild part is that none of this needs cutting-edge graphics. Fog, darkness, silence and decay are conceptually scary. Your brain does all the high-end rendering automatically. Silent Hill 1 just understands how to aim that instinct. Silent Hill's monsters should not work as well as they do. We live in an era where horror creatures are meticulously sculpted, motion captured and textured to death. You can see veins, pores, individual teeth. It's all very impressive and half the time completely forgettable. Because once your brain goes, oh, that's what this monster looks like, the fear drops off a cliff. Silent Hill is operating with, let's be honest, ugly models. The animations are stiff, the shapes are blocky. If you pause the game and look at the screenshot, nothing about it screams convincingly real, but that's exactly why it works. The design lives right in that uncanny gap between recognizable and unreadable. You think you know what you're looking at, but just not quite. Take the dog-like creatures on the streets, for example. They're almost dogs, but their proportions are off. Their skin looks wrong, their movement is jerky. Same thing with the childlike enemies in the school or the nurses in the hospital. They're based on familiar human silhouettes, but something about the way they stand, the way they move, the missing detail feels like a corrupted memory rather than a literal body. That corrupted memory feeling is important. These monsters don't come across like living animals. They feel like ideas that grew teeth. They're less, this is a demon with a specific lore entry, and more, this is some emotional or psychological mess made physical. Even if you don't know the deeper symbolism or lore details, you still feel these enemies belong to a world shaped by guilt, pain and trauma. The game helps this along by refusing to over-explain anything. It doesn't stop to say, hey, here's a neat little cutscene where we define what each monster means. The connections are there if you want to dig, but they are never fully nailed down. So your brain does what it always does with unexplained symbols. It keeps thinking about them. And that's where Silent Hill 1's bad graphics suddenly becomes its best advantage. The lack of detail leaves room. Your mind fills in the gaps with your own private associations, your own discomforts. The creatures become more personal, less generic. They stop looking like assets and start feeling like true manifestations of the mind. So while other games are chasing realism, Silent Hill accidentally stumbled into something far more durable. Abstraction. And abstraction ages insanely well, because there's no point in time where the human brain stops being uncomfortable with half-understood shapes moving toward it in the dark. The final piece of why Silent Hill 1's fear never really expires is simple. It doesn't treat you like an audience. It treats you like an accomplice. Harry Mason is not a power fantasy character. He's not trained, not graceful, and certainly not equipped for Demon Town tourism. His movements are heavy, his arm is unreliable, and combat never feels like something you get good at so much as something you survive by the skin of your teeth. That awkwardness is intentional. If Harry controlled like a modern action hero, half the horror would be evaporated. Instead, every encounter feels like it could go sideways quickly. You're always hyper aware of your ammo count, your health, and the distance between you and the next safe room. Not because the HUD is screaming at you, but because you don't trust yourself to get out of trouble cleanly. This creates a really specific kind of dread of participation. You're not watching him walk into danger, you are the one forcing his feet forward. You are the one choosing to open every door that might have something breathing behind it. Whenever the radio screams and the fog closes in, you can't look away like it's a movie. The only way out is through, and that through is mapped to your thumbs. The level design reinforces this beautifully. Silent Hill's spaces aren't just creepy, they're disorienting. The school is a looping maze of similar corridors and locked doors. The hospital is a vertical labyrinth that keeps folding back on in itself. Even the town map, as helpful as it can be, keeps reminding you how small you are in a place that doesn't care whether you understand it or not. Backtracking becomes its own form of horror. You know you have to go back down that hallway where you heard something earlier. You know that courtyard is probably full of enemies again. Progress isn't just go forward, progress is voluntarily re-enter the spaces you already decided were bad news. You adopt its nightmare logic piece by piece. All of that feeds into the endings. The choices you make, who you prioritize, what you notice, how you react, actually shapes the outcome. The story doesn't feel like a fixed ride, it feels like a result. When things go badly, it stings a little more because it feels like you mishandled this, not just the script. That's why Silent Hill's fear holds up so well over time. It isn't just printed onto the screen, it's built into the way you're forced to move, decide, and think. If you strip Silent Hill down to its raw ingredients, what survives isn't nostalgia. It is a design philosophy. Atmosphere over spectacle, implication over explanation, participation over passive viewing. The fog, the darkness, and the silence work because the unknown never stops being scary. The abstract, low-detail monsters work because our brains never stop being disturbed by the things we can almost, but not quite, understand. The clumsy combat, the mazes, the choices, they work because being vulnerable and being responsible for your own suffering is a feeling that doesn't belong to any particular console generation. New horror games will keep getting shinier. They'll look better, sound cleaner, and simulate reality with terrifyingly accurate precision. But unless they manage to tap into the same core truths Silent Hill 1 was built upon, that fear that thrives in what's unseen, unresolved, and uncomfortably personal, they'll always feel more temporary than this foggy little PS1 nightmare. Silent Hill doesn't just tell us that true fear never ages, it quietly proves it every time we step back into that empty town, hear that radio crackle to life, and realize that, somehow, in spite of everything we know, we are still just afraid.